Daze, Wasteland in some builds, not that Sheldon's playing it, but a lot of advantage to having the tempo, seizing the advantage.
For those of you who don't know Chris Marshall, he's a New England-based player, part of the crew with Ross Merriam, making the trip together, playing the same 75 for the event. That's on that list of elves, and we are underway with the match, though. Sheldon starts out with a Volcanic Island, hoping to make one of his main deck creatures, Monastery Swift Spear, Delver of Secrets, among the better one-drops.
There's some odd ducks hanging out in Sheldon's list here. He has a main deck Pyroblast. That's not that uncommon. A main deck Price of Progress as well. The Pyroblast, no utility against elves. The Price of Progress can be hit or miss. It does come up. They have Bayous and Guys Cradles and so forth, but I think Sheldon would prefer not to draw those cards.
Well, it's going to be the namesake card of the deck that he starts out with, Delver of Secrets. They'll get some damage, whereas Chris has a great start of his own. His start is going to be Deathrite Shaman. It's the 1/2 mana elf. And Sheldon with the free flip on Delver off Brainstorm. This is one of the scarier starts for a blue-red Delver deck.
Especially against elves. Keep in mind that elves has no way to remove creatures game 1 and no flyers. So this Delver is just good to go.
We get a Jataxian Probe to look at Chris's hand, and we'll see it here. It's 2 copies of Gaia's Cradle, legendary land. He'll still get some value off it. We have Elvish Visionary, Heritage Druid, Craterhoof Behemoth, and one other elf in the hand here right now.
Yeah, there's a Natural Order all the way over to the left here. So this is a hand that is potentially powerful, but also very fragile that Chris has.
Yeah, it's a little light on lands. He does have the 2 copies of Gaia's Cradle, and if he plays the second one, the Deathrite can use it to make mana. But you're right, if Sheldon has a good amount of removal early on, he can pick apart Chris's hand. You see him doing something like that with this Forked Bolt on Deathrite Shaman.
So Sheldon had the option there of brainstorming first, trying to hunt down a second land, but the consequence if he misses is so high that he's taking a slightly more conservative route here, just using Forked Bolt on the Deathrite Shaman, not trying to dig for land number 2.
Well, this is one of the dangers of Chris's land. If you look at it here, his second land drop are both Gaia's Cradles. So if he has no creatures in play, he actually doesn't have a second source of mana.
Yeah, part of that is, he still has the Heritage Druid, but Sheldon, now armed with the information, can choose to pick a fight over that if he wants to.
Yeah, placing a Broken Sleeve here, that's why we have the pause. Chris's draw for the turn was a copy of Green Sun's Zenith, so he can Zenith for Dryad Arbor. I think that and Heritage Druid are the only plays he could make this turn.
Yeah, he can Zenith for 0, then play a Cradle, then play his Heritage Druid.
We'll see if he does that. It would be a play that's very soft to Daze if he goes for it. He's going to go the opposite order. Heritage Druid, then plays Gaia's Cradle, leaving the Zenith for a different target.
And I wonder if Sheldon's going to run back the play he had last time. He has a Lightning Bolt in hand, still no second land, but if he was willing to just Forked Bolt the Deathrite Shaman, it would stand to reason he would do the same thing here because Chris's hand is so fragile, but becomes very explosive without that much help.
He's just trying to keep him off lands, knowing that all of Chris's lands are Gaia's Cradles. So he's going to go ahead and Lightning Bolt the Heritage Druid. Swings in, Chris drops to 14. Sheldon still operating on 1 land for the time being.
And a lot of this you can chalk up to Gataxian Probe. If Sheldon didn't know the hand, it's possible he would have brainstormed on turn 2, and that could have unleashed all hell from Chris's hand. But knowing the vulnerability of Chris's hand right now, he's going after the mana, and Chris really struggling to get anything going.
Well, Chris is going to get some lands in play this turn. You see that Green Sun's Zenith for 0. It'll find Dryad Arbor. He'll have another mana available now because Gaia's Cradle taps for something. Depending on what his draw for the turn was, he might be able to make something. Looks like right now he's just going to pass back.
Yeah, I believe it was another copy of Natural Order. So he gets to next, if the Dryad Arbor stays in play, he gets to next turn with 3 mana because the Dryad Arbor can be tapped and the Gaia's Cradle is making 1. If he is unable to keep the Dryad Arbor in play, he goes back to 1 mana and nothing in play. Really dangerous spot to be in. So this is a very, he has got to sweat this turn out because if he's able to get into the next turn with a board, he can start getting something going. But if that Dryad Arbor dies, he's got very little action.
Well, Freerksen's going to lead on a Ponder this turn. The top 3 cards he looked at, none of them were lands, so he's going to go ahead and shuffle, and he doesn't draw into a land. It is a Forked Bolt, however. He has a copy of Daze in his hand, so he puts Chris down to 11, and despite missing 3 consecutive land drops, you have to think that Freerksen might still be in this.
Yeah, there's no guarantee that Chris can even do a lot this turn. It's just not quite as dire. And you see you pick up another copy of Gaia's Cradle, so.
Yeah, 4 copies of the legendary land in the Elves deck. It is that good when its draws are good, but not really a card you want to draw 3 of.
So he can, tap the Cradle for 2, play another guy's cradle, tap it for 4, natural order, but that doesn't really get him anywhere. There's no big creature to draw into this turn, or to play rather. It's just Crater Hoof Behemoth game 1.
Not to mention, that would do a really poor job of playing around the daze that we know is in Sheldon's hand. So he's going to make Nettle Sentinel here. He'll have 1 mana floating. Nothing was able to be dazed that turn. And this seems like a tipping point here. If Chris untaps with these 3 creatures and Gaia's Cradle in play, Gaia's Cradle in hand, he can have one of those really big turns that you often can see out of an Elves deck.
But it looks like Sheldon has picked up main deck Fork Bolt number 2 last turn, and I would imagine that's going to be taking out the Dryad Arbor and the Elvish Visionary in short order.
Yeah, you get to see just why that card has been so good. It grows in popularity due to the popularity of these Delver strategies, and I think just a lot of collateral damage there at the Elves deck.
For sure. I think this card going into main decks is more about Young Pyromancer than anything else, but it can be really punishing to Death and Taxes and Elves as well.
So you see the Arid Mesa, it's going to go ahead and search up here. He's going to lead first on Monastery Swift Spear, wants to make sure he gets that prowess trigger. And as you mentioned, here's Forked Bolt, Dryad Arbor, and Elvish Visionary go down. And that's so much mana he just destroyed. It was 3 sources of mana with just 1 card.
And Chris's hand is not very good to begin with. He can't really weather this kind of storm.
He's down to 6 here. Thanks to that 2/3 hit off Monastery Swift Spear and a 3 power swing on the Insectile Aberration. And all it takes is a Lightning Bolt out of Sheldon, and we'll be on to game 2.
Yeah, and it's a credit to this deck how Sheldon was able to operate so ruthlessly on only 1 land for most of this game.
Second Nettle Sentinel from Chris Marshall. Now the Cradle will tap for 2. He's going to just have to pass back the turn. And now we'll see, can Sheldon end the game here, or will he need another turn to do it?
Remember, no removal, no life gain outside of Deathrite Shaman for Elves game 1, so Sheldon can be pretty safe going for the kill if he's got it.
We'll see. Starts off on Treasure Cruise. 7 cards in the graveyard that will prowess the Monastery Swift Spear.
Sure.
Can he find a Bolt? He finds a Ponder, finds a Force of Will, finds a Brainstorm. He may not have the kill this turn, but he has a ton of permission.
He's not really, there's no risk of anything really going wrong here because the Force of Will probably covers him from anything Chris can muster next turn, and there's no way for him to stop the Insectile Aberration.
Yeah, Force of Will, Daze, blue card. Ponder will be the second play from Sheldon. Can he find maybe a land in that Lightning Bolt? He finds Young Pyromancer, another Ponder. Looks like he'll shuffle, nothing he really wants. So update right now, Blue-Red Delver in one of your top 4 matchups, David Stroud takes game 1 off Christopher Fornese. Death Shadow not getting there. The winner of that will play the winner of this match. And right now, Blue-Red Delver looking like it's ahead in both.
As you use the exact correct expression, collateral damage. There's a lot of stuff in the Blue-Red Delver deck that's challenging for Elves to beat. Not because this deck is gunning for Elves, but because it's gunning for the mirror match, and both matchups happen to be defined by small creatures.
Well, here's a swing from Freerksen. The Monastery Swift Spear is a 3/4, thanks to the copy of Treasure Cruise and Ponder. Chris will double block with Elves. He's trying to take down the Swift Spear, and this spell is just going to be too good for Sheldon to pass up. He'll play a Brainstorm. That's enough to make the Monastery Swift Spear win the combat and not die.
Chris was, kind of up against it anyway, and losing both of his creatures going to the next turn, facing lethal with 1 mana in play and nothing else, that's going to be too much.
Sit there. And then you think Chris has got to suspect it. Sheldon drew so many cards. Asking the Blue-Red Delver deck to produce a 1 mana instant is really not asking a huge question of it.
Yeah, and actually this locks up the game this turn as Sheldon has found, he's out of mana, never mind. So he can't bolt this turn, but
he's found a Lightning Bolt just in case.
Just in case.
So 3 damage. Chris goes on to 3, loses all his creatures. As you mentioned, we'll start this turn with 1 mana, and that's going to be the game. Sheldon Freerksen, 1 game down, 5 more before he gets that back-to-back championship.
And that was the start you're looking for if you're playing against Elves. You have a turn 1 Delver, you get to flip it on the second turn. Lots of bolts, both made out copies of Fork Bolts. Chris's draw was not very good to begin with, was really leaning on being able to keep those early mana creatures in play to get anything going. Sheldon kept it off of it, and at the end of the game, he was glutted with natural orders, Crater Hoof Behemoths, extra guys, Cradles, just nothing to be done there.
All right, well, maybe Chris has some sideboard plans. While he figures that out, we're going to bring you back into the booth. Welcome to those of you who have joined us for our elimination rounds this evening. One of the things that we are going to do during our top 8 is we'll have a couple giveaways in the middle of each round. For the top 8, Patrick will ask you a trivia question. If you believe you know the answer, hop onto Twitter. Make sure you have the hashtag SCG Premium, which you see at the bottom of your screen. Send a tweet at us with the answer, and after we finished all 4 of our top 8 matches, one of the correct answers will receive a 3-month giveaway. So, what do we have for him?
So Sheldon, our first overall seed, looking to be a back-to-back champion, which only Jerry Thompson has done. He's playing Blue-Red Delver, and as is common for Brainstorm, Ponder, Treasure Cruise decks, there's some funky one-ofs in the list. In the main deck, there's a single copy of Pyroblast in the sideboard. I imagine that's being sided out. There's another one-of spell, 2-mana red spell. It's an instant. Can you name that spell?
All right, if you believe you know the answer, go ahead and tweet it at us. Once again, you have until the conclusion of our last round to get your answer in. And with that, let's go ahead and look at what Chris is going to do. That game did not go well for him.
Well, I think that Sheldon's draw was about perfect given Chris's hand. Chris had the type of hand where if a couple things break right, or if he's allowed to keep his board intact, he can do some really powerful things. Sheldon prevented him from doing that.
What a testament here to the Blue-Red Delver deck to say his draw was just about as good as it can be when you consider he missed his second land drop on turns 2, 3, and 4, and still really ran away with the game.
Well, if you have a Delver and a bunch of bolts, you really only need the one Volcanic Island. The rest will take care of itself. In Sheldon's sideboard here, you see 2 Grafdigger's Cages, 2 Pithy Needles, a Grim Lavamancer, a Blood Moon, an Echoing Truth, and Electrickery, 2 Flusterstorms, 2 Press Progress, 2 Pyroblast, 1 Smash Spit of the Rain. A lot to like here. I like bringing in the Electrickery, a lot of 1 toughness creatures in the elf deck naturally, the single Grim Lavamancer, the 2 Grafdigger's Cage, which is good against both Green Sun Zenith and Natural Order, and the 2 Pithy Needles as well. Lots of activated abilities in the elf deck. Tons of creatures with weird sort of fidgety abilities.
I know we just said it, but it seems like he can't say it enough. Collateral damage here really hurting this matchup. Electrickery, once again, it's not going for elves, but once you have one in your sideboard, you might as well bring it in here.
A lot of the cards do double and triple duty in Legacy out of necessity because there's so many decks and the field is so broad. You can't really afford to have that many narrow sideboard cards unless the matchup's especially bad for you or you expect it to be especially prevalent. Electrickery may not be the most efficient thing against every deck that's flushed with 1 toughness creatures in Legacy, but it does enough work against all of them that it's worthy of a sideboard slot.
So when you look at Chris Marshall's sideboard, you have it on the bottom of our screen there. A lot of this seems to be a control plan. You see Cabal Therapy, Thoughtseize, Abrupt Decay. Are any of these things he wants? I suppose he can Abrupt Decay some of the more problematic creatures out of Sheldon.
I like bringing in the Abrupt Decays. The discard package I don't think he wants here. Sheldon's deck is too redundant. There's no particular card he really wants to go for here. I like bringing in the Abrupt Decays a lot here to fight Delver, the Grim Lavamancer in the sideboard, blows up Grafdigger's Cage, Pithy Needle, and so forth. I like the Reclamation stage because Sheldon is bringing in a lot of high-impact artifacts. I think the one Scavenging Ooze is good here as well. It's a reasonable Green Sun Zenith target, and in some spots it's actually a reasonable Natural Order target because you can grow it outside of Lightning Bolt range, and if you nuke Sheldon's graveyard, that turns off Grim Lavamancer and Treasure Cruise.
Yeah, so a pretty decent card. Once you get a creature up to 4 toughness, it is hard for Blue-Red Delver to remove. On the other side of our bracket, Stephen Mann and David McDarby, they have, in their throwback match of Teamer Delver versus Maverick, it plays out just as you remember it. Maverick taking a game as McDarby wins game 1.
It's a really hard package for Teamer Delver to beat. An unchecked Mother Runes by itself is almost like you're on Delver of Secrets or Bust, because combat on the ground just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, at that point, you're trying to fly through the air with Delver. And there are cards like Swords to Plowshares in a Maverick deck. It's not like they can't remove your flyers.
And furthermore, David's deck is packing a little bit of anti-graveyard stuff in the sideboard too, with a Nile Spellbomb, which is incidentally very powerful against Tarmogoyf and Nimble Mongoose.
That is our backup match, so if we reach the conclusion of this, we will go ahead and see if Steven can mount a comeback. As of right now, we are on Christopher Marshall, Sheldon Freerksen. Sheldon 2-0, 2-0, 2-0 this morning in the standard top 8. And really defeating, well, first of all, defeating in the top 8 this morning, Ross Merriam in top 8. That's Chris's car mate for the event. Won that one. Then he took down in the top 8, played against Glenn Jones, 1-2-0. Beat Brad Nelson in the finals, 2-0. So streaking through a lot of really skilled players. Fouled that up by winning his first 8 rounds of Legacy, drawing, and here he is up a game again. This has just been a stellar day for Sheldon.
I don't know if I've ever been on that kind of heater.
I just can't lose, not even games.
And that murderer's row he got through the standard top 8. I mean, no one can say he didn't earn it. That's a very tough group of players to get through.
Chris on the play. He's going to have a turn 1 Deathrite Shaman again. This time it's off a fetch land, which will give him some extra acceleration if the Deathrite Shaman lives through the first turn. And it will live, but maybe just for a turn. Grim Lavamancer is the play by Sheldon.
And the heater continues. Both the fork bolts in game 1, and now the single Grim Lavamancer in the sideboard to start off game 2.
Now, if Chris can have an explosive enough draw, he can power through Grim Lavamancer. Sheldon really can only fill up his graveyard so fast, but...
This is still not the card that Chris
Yeah.
wants to be playing against.
And it's very possible Sheldon here actually does have a fetch land. If he had a fetch land, he wouldn't have wanted to use it that turn because he wouldn't want Chris using Deathrite to get rid of it. So if he hasn't, I think it's pretty reasonable that Sheldon will have 2 cards in the graveyard next turn.
Normally the start indicates, maybe Sheldon can't fill up the graveyard, but for the reason you mentioned, I think he wants to try as hard as he can to keep 2 cards in his graveyard. And it wouldn't surprise me if Chris went out of his way to not activate the Deathrite Shaman here.
Both taps here. Elvish Visionary for Marshall. He'll draw a card. Elvish Visionary the draw there too. Yeah, and rather than casting another elf with his Deathrite, he's going to pass the turn back. Heads up play here for Marshall. We'll see if it pays off. Trying to not lose his Deathrite this turn. Then again, if Sheldon's on a Grim Lavamancer plan, a stream of Elvish Visionaries into a Gaia's Cradle is a pretty good counter answer from Chris.
Yes, it is.
And this is the play we're talking about. Sheldon cracks a fetch land. And when you crack that, the fetch land is in the graveyard. But before Sheldon can find the land, Chris is going to exile it with Deathrite Shaman to make a mana, but not spend it.
The only real way for Sheldon to make this work is if he had something like a Taxian Probe in his hand, because if he opens up by casting a cantrip and then goes to sacrifice the fetch land, he doesn't have 2 mana in play. Or, sorry, he doesn't have red mana in play. So in response, Chris can go ahead and take the land out of the graveyard before there's a red mana in play, and the Grim Lavamancer cannot be activated.
So for the turn then, Sheldon will make Delver of Secrets and Grafdigger's Cage. We'll pass back the turn. Chris has bought himself an extra turn here for the Deathrite Shaman. We'll see how he uses it. And
but things are not going that badly for Chris, given the opening that Sheldon has had here.
yeah, and with the draw of Glimpse of Nature, which he had there, Chris can do quite a number this turn, and we'll see just how much he draws. He starts on Glimpse of Nature. This used to be the centerpiece of the Elves deck. Now it's more of an afterthought, but just this efficient card drawer.
This is winning in easy mode, and the deck has become so multifaceted that now you can do things like just Natural Order for Craterhoof Behemoth, or even hard cast Craterhoof Behemoth. The wins you get with Natural Order, with Glimpse of Nature rather, are less common than they used to be, but it's a testament to how good the deck's become that's a backup plan, as you mentioned. You don't expect for Glimpse to win the game. It's convenient when it does, but the deck has a lot of redundancy built in now.
So Chris gonna cast Glimpse, swing with Elvish Visionary.
The problem for Chris now is Glimpse is the easiest way for him to power through Grafdigger's Cage. If the Glimpse hasn't resolved, then he's got to blow it up or hard cast a Craterhoof Behemoth or flood the board. All of these are a little tricky to set up.
Yeah, you saw that Force of Will on Glimpse of Nature. Sheldon recognizing just how powerful it is. Delver will trade with Elvish Visionary.
And to me, that's an indicator that Sheldon thinks he can lean exclusively on Grim Lavamancer to lock Chris out of the game, if he's willing to make that kind of trade.
Yeah, that's not a trade I expected. What it does do is it depowers Chris's Gaia's Cradles. See Quirion Ranger, the replacement elf from Chris. 2 mana off Deathrite Shaman. He's just going to exile the Force of Will. He's going to deal 2 to Sheldon.
Just doing this preemptively, hoping that Sheldon doesn't have another way to put a card in a graveyard. It's a long shot, but there's no cost in doing it, so you might as well try.
Yep. Not sure if Sheldon had a draw before to put something in the graveyard. He does now, though. Scalding Tarn is the draw. He's going to get a land, get a Grim Lavamancer activation, but Sheldon's down to 2 cards in his hand. He has some control elements here. Grim Lavamancer, Grafdigger's Cage, but he doesn't have that pressure that you normally see out of a Delver deck.
And as powerful as this Grim Lavamancer is, when Sheldon's running low on resources, the easiest way for Blue-Red Delver to gas back up is Treasure Cruise, but you can't do both.
Right, we see Grim Lavamancer activation, taking it down Deathrite Shaman here. It was a long time coming since turn 1. Chris held onto it for 2 more turns, but the elf will finally hit the graveyard. And no follow-up for Sheldon. So despite some good control elements, and this is we're going to see the redundancy of elves, I think, pull a lot of weight here.
This might be a game where Chris is able to win with the most backup of backup plans, which is just attacking a bunch.
And we see here Wireward Symbiote, Quirion Ranger, a tap 3 from Gaia's Cradle. That will be Scavenging Ooze from Chris Marshall. Now with that Ooze and Cradle in play, it's unlikely that Sheldon will ever get enough cards in his graveyard.
And this is the risk of trading off that Delver of Secrets earlier on. Sheldon playing the game, assuming that he can kind of have control of things for a really long time. And that's just not the case.
You see Chris taking this tap down moment to immediately exile his own creature, bumping that Scavenging Ooze up to a 3/3 and out of range of Grim Lobomancer. And you know what? I think you're right. This looks like the traditional beatdowns are going to be the plan for Chris Marshall.
He's so light on resources at this point, and it's very hard for him to pull back up.
Young Pyromancer the play for Sheldon. 4th land, it's a Flooded Strand. He will pass back. Chris has the option to exile his own Elvish Visionary. He's going to wait on that.
Well, he doesn't want it to get bolted, so he would prefer for there to be a second creature in the graveyard so he can activate, get to a 4/4, and if Sheldon responds with a bolt, he can activate again.
Elvish Visionary the play here for Chris. He's going to draw it. Now he has that combo of Elvish Visionary plus Wirewood Symbiote. That's a card advantage in and of itself. And we'll see 5 mana floating off the Gaia's Cradle. He'll use 2 of it to recast Elvish Visionary. That flipped around Wirewood Symbiote rather, it's a shortcut that people use to show that its once per turn ability has already been used. He's going to cast another Symbiote. 3 mana goes down to 2. He'll replay the Elvish Visionary again, now with no mana floating. A 3rd card for the turn. You see a Glimpse of Nature, the draw.
There's so many little triggers in the deck between Wirewood Symbiote and Quarian Ranger that it's very challenging to track it unless you're flipping your cards upside down.
And he'll play Verdant Catacombs for the turn. That'll fetch. Chris still at a healthy 19, not having to worry about getting burned out. And once the board gets this cluttered, it seems like it's Electrickery or bust from Sheldon.
And even that, with the Symbiotes in play, he's got a lot of insurance, plus the Scavenging Ooze makes very good use out of Chris's graveyard getting filled up with creatures. So even the best draw in Sheldon's deck, I don't think does a ton here long term.
Yeah, he needs to keep Chris under control before things get to this point. It seems like once Chris breaks through, it's really hard to reel him back in. You see there a swing for 3 from Chris.
And at this stage, Chris is happy to trade one of his creatures in play for even a Young Pyromancer token because he really would like to get a second creature in the graveyard because that frees up Scavenging Ooze to run wild. He does not want this to get bolted right now, so he's still waiting.
You can target the same creature over and over again. So as long as he has 2 green mana, he can protect that Scavenging Ooze from a Lightning Bolt.
Yep.
All right, some other updates from the field here. We see first of all, on this side of the bracket, a 2-0 win for David Stroud. That's Blue-Red Delver. He takes down Christopher Fornese's Death Shadows, and Stroud will be waiting in the semifinals for the winner of this match. On the other side of the bracket, our defending champion, James Wynn, up a game over his burn opponent, Oliver Coffey, and winning what you said is, and I agree, is one of his toughest matchups.
Yeah, a bit of an upset. Tarmogoyf and Stop Permission can still get the job done. But that's a very big upset if he's able to win that match.
We're on back to Chris's turn. He starts with Glimpse of Nature. Here's Heritage Druid. He'll draw a card, and this could be the turn. I imagine he'll be... This is going to be exciting.
I mean, we could easily be looking at a Craterhoof Behemoth cast this turn.
Or his hold, maybe 3 Craterhoof Behemoths cast, if he wanted to start getting showy.
And
Nettle Sentinel, the play, draws a card. Now we see the Nettle Sentinel Heritage Druid interaction. It's going to be 3 green, 2 of it spent on Elvish Visionary. Nettle Sentinel untaps, 1 green floating. Going to draw 2 cards off this one. You see it on Sheldon's face. He knows this one's looking out of reach.
And the body language of Sheldon, to borrow some Magic Online slang, is the look of someone who has F6'd.
Yeah. F6. What is the button you'd press to show that you are not going to do anything else this turn?
Yeah.
Your opponent does not. Everything's going to resolve. They don't need to wait for you
Don't
anymore.
bother. Just do your thing.
Another 1-drop there for Chris. So now 0 mana floating. He still can tap 3 elves for 3 green. Using the Quarian Ranger, he's going to looks like go ahead and attack.
Just go to beat downtown.
Sure. If he doesn't have any more elves in his hand, and I'm not The thing is, post-combat, he can continue this engine if he wants. He could use symbiotes, bounce creatures, recast them, draw cards, make mana. Yep. Here's a swing from Chris. He'll actually just pass the turn. I feel like if Chris had wanted to, he could have won that turn if he was willing to be aggressive with the symbiotes. Not that Sheldon has an out here. You can't fault, Chris for playing it that way, but he could have had a grandiose turn there. Gitaxian Pro will flip Delver into Insectile Aberration, but Chris at 19, this is out of reach for Sheldon. That Grafdigger's Cage is stopping cards like Green Sun's Zenith on Chris's side and Natural Order.
But it does speak to the robustness of elves here that, Chris is just going to beat downtown. Yeah. That's good enough.
We do see Chris's hand, 2 copies of Green Sun's Zenith. And see, he could have continued the chain there. Another copy of Nettle Sentinel. Once you get in Heritage Druid 2 Nettle Sentinels and a Glimpse, you often just can go the whole distance. And Sheldon will draw off Gitaxian Probe, and we are on to a decider.
Both attacks look very impressive when they are on the play. I'll say that much.
Yeah, Sheldon did have his turn 1 Grim Lavamancer, but a lot of it I think you can really track down to Chris being on the play. He has that turn 1 Deathrite Shaman. In a world where we switch the die roll, Sheldon plays a turn 1 Lavamancer, and I'm wondering if Chris even drops his Deathrite.
Exactly. He probably goes turn 1 go, turn 2 Visionary instead of going turn 1 Deathrite, turn 2 cast a bunch of stuff, turn 3 cast a bunch of stuff, and so on down the line.
Yeah. And while these players go to Game 3, our backup match between Stephen Mann and David McDarby follows suit. They'll go to Game 3. Kind of the theme is being on the play matters a bunch. David and Stephen both taking the game more on the play. That's Teamer Delver and Maverick.
And I still like David on the play for Game 3 pulling out the match.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it depends on whether or not David has that turn 1 Mother of Runes, you'd have to think. That is such a strong play from Maverick in this matchup if he has it and it's not killed.
It's true, though it's not just turn 1 Mother of Runes, it's also turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic, it's also turn 3 Knight of the Reliquary. There's a lot of dimensions to the Maverick attack against Teamer Delver.
So those of you just joining us, we are in our top 8 coverage here in Portland of our second tournament of the weekend. This is the Legacy Tournament. Sheldon Freerksen, your standard open champion and overall 1 seed, going undefeated this morning to win, undefeated today in the Swiss, trying to go for the double victory. He's going to need to pass through Chris Marshall as they go to Game 3.
Adding some intrigue to this whole storyline, remember, in the standard open, Sheldon's only loss was to Jerry Thompson in the Swiss rounds. Jerry conceded to Brad Nelson in the semifinals. Brad then lost in the finals. Jerry with a win against Prague gets an opportunity to run it back against Sheldon, defend the title. And now we're here, Sheldon the first overall seed, and with an opportunity to join Jerry T in the annals of Star City Games Open Series history.
And if Sheldon gets there, you have to think that with that concession, you kind of have to say, all right, well, that was with Jerry's blessing in a certain level.
Yes. It's nice. You know, it's a fun storyline for me. You know what I really enjoy? Actions have consequences. I'm a big fan of that storyline. The things we do matter. I love it. Doesn't happen enough in real life.
Yeah, if Sheldon gets there, he can write a thank you note to Jerry.
Yeah.
Say, I really appreciate it.
I couldn't have done it without you.
Yeah. All right, Game 3 though. He still has some matches to go, and it's going to start with this game to get the match. Fetchland into Volcanic Island is a start for Sheldon. We saw this in Game 1, him starting on Delver of Secrets and immediately flipping it, put Chris really on the back foot. Can Sheldon repeat the performance? It looks like it's not going to be a Delver, but it's going to be Grim Lavamancer, that one of in the sideboard. Coming.
Finding his way into his opening hand, and like you said, on the play, this is a much different threat than on the draw.
Card's good against elves, right? Yeah.
It's pretty solid. My Lavamancers have some notches in their belts against elves, I'll tell you what.
Well, Chris does have some answers. He has 2 copies of his sideboarded Abrupt Decays in his hand, so he will maybe be able to get this by this Lavamancer. He's just not even going to make an elf on turn 1. No sense in feeding the Lavamancer.
There's still the issue of tempo. Even if he gets it off the table, he's looking at saying go on turn 1, playing a removal spell on turn 2, and then finally getting the board going on turn 3.
Yeah, and he's going to make an elf. This is the copy of Llanowar Elves. Was a 4 of in the deck until Deathrite Shaman was printed. Now there's just a 1 of. Wanting 5 1-mana accelerators.
One of Magic's icons, now fallen by the wayside.
That's back, what is it? It's plural. That's the part I like about it. I know we don't do that anymore. Now creatures are just one guy, but this is a whole bunch of elves. It's still a 1/1, but they make, right?
I think that's true.
Yeah, it's Llanowar elves. It's not Llanowar elf.
Yep.
It's Elvish Mystic. That one elf makes as much mana as the entire pack of Llanowar elves.
No wonder Llanowar Elves is out of rotation. So inefficient.
Turn 2, Monastery Swift Spear. That's the swing in for Sheldon. He's going to swing 1. Just rages on in there, leaving up a mana for Grim Lavamancer.
Whoa.
He's going to let Chris have the mana.
That is surprising to me.
Now
I don't know what there's to be gained here.
yeah, of course, I would spend that as soon as you can.
Yeah.
He'll go for Nettle Sentinel to start. Gaia's Cradle. And yeah, this is 2 mana already off the Llanowar Elf surviving. That maybe a misstep for Sheldon here. And it's going to be Abrupt Decay with a green floating.
If Sheldon ends up Lavamancering this Llanowar Elves anyway, all right, he's going to go after the Nettle Sentinel. I think the reason that Sheldon allowed this to happen is because he has a Fork Bolt in his hand and he's hoping to catch 2 things. My experience against Elves is just kill
'em
stuff
all.
as efficiently as you can. Don't get too caught up on trying to generate 2-for-1s.
Unless you need 2-for-1s. Like in this matchup, I guess I'd say, does Sheldon need to 2-for-1, Chris, to get it? And I just don't feel like he does right now.
No. And the Lavamancer, for the record, also represents a 2-for-1 of sorts. So
Sheldon, pre-combat, Grafdigger's Cage, Lightning Bolt for the Elf, swing for 3 with the Monastery Swift Spear. He'll pass back the... And Chris, this is a situation he was in round 1 as well. That Guy's Cradle tapping for 0. He'll play a Dryad Arbor, so he gets 1 mana off the Cradle. Maybe he Abrupt Decays the Swift Spear and resets the board. Looks like the play will be Scavenging Ooze. And Sheldon, this is a play I actually want to point out. It looks like he'll be able to Forked Bolt if he has one. Yeah, he can Forked Bolt the Scavenging Ooze, but he did use the Lightning Bolt last turn. If Chris had a green up, that sequencing could have been pretty detrimental for him.
yeah, and now Sheldon's really, again, very light on resources, looking at just Force of Will and X in hand, and Chris still with a lot of cards in hand.
Updates from across the field. James Wynn, defending champion, drops game 2. He's going to go to game 3 against Oliver Coffey, playing Burn. I'll go back to Chris. He's going to have at least 4 mana this turn. This is a turn where Chris could really go off, so to speak. 3 mana available, could make some elves. Guy's Cradle could tap for 4. Remember, he can't get a big natural order turn or a Green Sun Zenith because of that cage.
I think that Chris's hand is also a little land heavy right now too, which is an issue. I don't think he has a lot of action left over.
Quirion Ranger. You're right, he has Abrupt Decay, and it looks like natural order. So he could Abrupt Decay the cage and then natural order for maybe something like Progenitus if he boarded it in.
It's an open question. A lot of people go to Progenitus post-board, assuming that natural order for Courier Hope Behemoth is going to be hard to generate against an opponent with a lot of removal spells. So Progenitus is sort of the cheat. I know there's a lot of people, Ross Merriam is of the school where he is very conservative about bringing in Progenitus, only brings it in when he feels he absolutely has to. If Chris and Ross test together, I think that would be, that would point to Progenitus probably not being in the deck, but you never know for sure.
Draw for Sheldon was Brainstorm, great with his uncracked fetch land. Remember, one of his cards in hand is a Force of Will. He didn't have a blue card to partner with it, but this Brainstorm is a great one for Sheldon. Finds a second copy of Force of Will, a Treasure Cruise, and a Young Pyromancer. So he has a backup threat, a card drawer, and counter magic. Currently looks like 4 cards in his graveyard, 5 if you count the fetch land. So still a little work to go for Sheldon, but he's got a great setup here.
Well, if you find something juicy to Force of Will, that's going to get it done, and an Abrupt Decay puts the Grafdigger's Cage in the graveyard as well.
You wonder if Chris is setting up for a natural order, it looks like, if he's going to go ahead and Abrupt Decay the cage. And we see right now he's going to cast Quirion, and he's going to sack it to natural order. That'll get the Force of Will out of Sheldon's hand. Scores a 2-for-1. Chris's hand is empty.
Yep. And now Sheldon, with the last leftover Treasure Cruise, ready to gas back up.
Is that good when there's 7 cards? That sacrifice of the fetch land will be the 7th card in his graveyard. And yeah, he'll get to have a treasure cruise.
And both players have no resources.
I like it on that board.
It's a good spot to draw 3 cards. Most boards are a good spot to draw 3 cards. This one especially so.
Especially for 1 mana. It's
quite the deal.
decent top 2 cards from Sheldon. He wants to get some different ones, though. He'll crack the fetch land before he cruises here. Doing it on end step, wants to draw something new. And this is where the treasure cruises are so good in the Delver deck. You see them trading until both resources are gone, and Sheldon will reload first. Chris, you know, 1 blue, 7 exile. That's treasure cruise. Swift Spear becomes a 2/3. Sheldon reloads off 3 cards. Young Pyromancer, fetch land.
It looks like Sheldon didn't find very much, at least. You know, if you're a fan of Chris here, I think his hand is now just lands.
Yep, it'll be he'll cast that Young Pyromancer, swing in for 2 with Swift Spear. Chris doesn't have that much time, though. He is down to 8. And is that another copy of Natural Order for Chris?
I mean, we're about to find out.
That is a crazy good draw for Chris Marshall.
Yeah, and Sheldon, again, he didn't find very much.
Does he bring in Progenitus? He does.
And Sheldon's at 14. This is a
became
one and done.
game.
This is better than a game. This is one and done. Sheldon's got to win next turn. And his hand's just 2 lands.
Well, he's at 14. He can take 10, right?
Yes. Sorry, he is allowed the 1 hit.
Swing here from Chris. That'll put Sheldon down to 13. Crack his fetch down to 12. 12 is fine. 10 is not okay. And what a top deck from Chris. It may have just been enough to get him this game. We will see.
Yeah, the tough part here is Sheldon
can still win.
Probably can't attack this turn, and if Chris draws any sort of chump blocker, it's probably safe for him to attack with Progenitus.
The danger would be, I think, if Sheldon finds something like a Forked Bolt, that would probably kill Chris.
There's a lot of really bad draws here in Sheldon's deck for Chris. But if Sheldon misses, or if he just draws a random creature or something, and Chris finds a chump blocker for next turn, Progenitus can probably attack.
Tough spot here for our standard open champion. It's close. He knows he can take 1 hit, but then once Progenitus attacks, he'll have to win on the swing back. His draw for the turn was Monastery Swift Spear.
And the real problem here from Sheldon's side is Chris controls the rules of engagement. As long as, let's say Chris draws lands, for example, Chris can just say go. He does not have to attack with either creature. He can wait until he amasses enough of a board that can block to start swinging in with the Progenitus.
We know Sheldon has 2 cards in hand. 1 of them's a land. He's going to swing with his 3 creatures. Progenitus eats a Swift Spear. Chris takes 3, goes to 5. At least 1 land in Sheldon's hand, maybe 2. And he'll pass. Chris has 11 damage on the table. Swing for 10. Sheldon drops to 2. Second blocker, it's Heritage Druid from Chris Marshall.
And that's Grafdigger's Cage. That's no help.
Does not look like it'll get it there for Sheldon.
Jerry Thompson, I hope you're watching.
That top decked Natural Order looks like it is going to get it for Chris. It's a swing there. And you have it there. Chris Marshall, 2 games to 1 with a comeback win in Game 3, defeats Sheldon Freerksen, and he'll move on to the top 4 against David Stroud.
I know that Jerry Thompson was not watching because he just walked into the room as lethal damage was being dealt. He has survived the back-to-back Open Series win